A gangland murder in Belfast of the underworld's most wanted man. Hitman Robbie Lawler had countless enemies, but who ordered his death? This month, Crime World presents Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler, a podcast series that will bring you right into the black heart of organised crime. Based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, we'll follow a bloody trail into the underworld and to the narco-style murder and dismemberment of teenager Cian Mulready Woods, which would set in motion the complex plot to take out Lawler. Listen as we lift the lid on the inner workings of Ireland's gangland, revealing a cast of ruthless characters who take centre stage for their place in this real-life double-cross thriller. Crime World presents Double Cross, coming soon to all podcast platforms. Web of Betrayal by me, Nicola Talent, is now available on Audible and in all good bookstores. Tanya Fowles, welcome back. We're going to talk again about Katie Simpson, the murder of Katie Simpson. And this week, the police ombudsman have released what I would call a statement. It's certainly not a report. I was actually expecting, in my ignorance, a report which would detail sort of a timeline of what happened and where mistakes were made. But instead, this is pretty much a statement which says that the death of the PSNI basically failed. It was a failed and flawed investigation. And that is related to the failures to the Simpson family. This failures in the police investigation goes way further than just to one family. The victim herself, Katie Simpson, the report or this statement says that when she was both still alive and following her death, that police were alerted to the fact that Johnny Creswell, who brought her to the hospital, had convictions for assaulting his former partner, that her injuries were not consistent with the story that was told around them, and that there was concerns by a number of people outside of her family, because I don't think actually the immediate family raised any concerns at the time, but that Johnny Creswell could have had something to do with it. So this ombudsman's statement is the beginning of something, you'd like to think.
It is, Nicola, and thank you for having me back again. I'd like to think it's the beginning. It has certainly opened a few doors. It hasn't really solved anything. I don't see it as there seems to be a push about a lack of joined up thinking, and I'm not buying that. This is a dead girl. We're not talking about shoplifting. We're not talking about something that would be lower down the crime scale. This should have been all alert. And I think I've said it numerous times before. I understood all sudden deaths or all unusual deaths are suspicious until ruled out. Clearly, I was wrong. And it's Katie who's failed here. The PSNI failed Katie. And the problem there is no justice in life, no justice in death. But more worryingly, are we now, or hopefully, are we going to get the truth? Are we going to get to that point where the facts come out? Because the statement, and like yourself, despite engaging with the ombudsman from a very early stage when I was finally allowed to do so, the way I learned the outcome was through a press statement 3 hours after the press got it. So I'm not over impressed with that particular aspect, but
because
it's actually...
To explain that to people, Tanya, because while you're a journalist covering this story, you're also somebody who made a complaint to the ombudsman, because you were somebody who tried to alert the police as Katie was clinging to life in Alt Galvin Hospital in Derry, having been brought there by Jonathan Creswell on the 3rd of August 2020. He told hospital workers and emergency ambulance staff that she had basically tried to commit suicide, and he had found her hanging in a house they were sharing along with her older sister Christina, who was in a relationship with them, that he had cut her down and had sort of put her in the car and driven frantically towards the hospital in an effort to save her. But you, along with some other people, knew about his background. You saw red flags everywhere with the story he had gone to the hospital with, and you were screaming from the rooftops for the police to take a look at this suspicious death, which it should have been seen as, and to rule out that there could have been any foul play?
I wanted it at least looked at. There's a heck of a coincidence between this man and, yes, I did sit in court and I watched from the first day he was brought in over the Abbey Lyle case. I watched his demeanour and I covered every single hearing. The bail hearing was troubling because it was starting to come back, even though it was that far back. This case stuck out for me. And I remember him choking until she passed out. I remember him using implements around her neck. Now, then suddenly, a girl is in hospital with a supposed hanging injury. Now, one thing that jumped at me, and I really don't understand how this was missed, Katie's neck was not broken. And that is what hanging in the main causes. Katie's neck was not broken. Her airway had been cut off. Now, either she did that herself, and we know she didn't, or someone did it on her. And the only other person that was there was Creswell. So why are people not going, why are they not doing the little sums, the 2 and 2? Had I even known at that stage about him driving her over the border, as he did Abby, I would have been shouting even louder. But of course, none of that was ever disclosed. That only came out when he was finally arrested and charged. And even at that, if you compare images of Abby beside Katie, there are striking similarities. So even those little, they might be insignificant to some people, but to me, they were screaming. And I just became, you could hear them sighing on the end of the phone when I would ring back in, are you doing this? Now, I have to stress, nobody was expecting all the troops to go flying to Altnagelvin Hospital and drag someone out of there while a girl is dying. That would have been insensitive. But that was the time to look, to watch, to listen, to gather. Nothing done. The frightening part is all that was decided, the stand down or whatever they want to call it, that this was definitely suicide or self-inflicted or call it what you will, came on the first day, because I'm ringing in on the 4th. They had made their decision on the 3rd. The reason for that has to have been that they did not take photographs of her injuries, so no crime was suspected. You've got to get those early. Show them as they are, because the hospital has work to do. They have to be able to treat. There was no attempt made to forensically check Katie, because the clues would have been there. There were other aspects. Yes, the hospital were able to document it, her injuries, but that's not enough. That is not enough. So they closed the door on the Monday night. And whether that was from a direction, whether that was because Johnny was just so plausible and believable, but why are they only talking to Johnny? This man isn't even related to her as such. He's a brother-in-law, if you want to call it like that. Why aren't they talking about the people who knew Katie best, those who surrounded her, those who she was in touch with regularly? Because they would have told a different story, a very different story, but they didn't get that chance. And in the ones that tried to do it through me, who have really suffered badly over all this, I can see the pain in their faces, because they feel, did they say something wrong? Were they wrong to flag it up? Because it has just been a nightmare from day one. They simply did not accept that Katie would take her own life. That was their total. And when they come to me, they didn't even mention his name. But when they referred to a previous conviction involving a bath of bleach, I knew him straight away. And I joined the dots. What happened to the police? I'm not police. But I was able to join the dots pretty quickly.
And you talked, Tanya, about, it being, plausible that you're not going to be pushing people into going into a hospital room where somebody is fighting for their life and, tearing out people and questioning them. Definitely not. That's not the way we'd ever expect police to carry out investigations. But this ombudsman's statement, which is, as we say, an opening to hopefully to further investigations into the police behaviour around this, says that the investigation by the Ombudsman found that there were no effective searches carried out at Katie's address and that no supervisory officer attended the house at the initial stage of the investigation. So this is stuff they could have done outside of that hospital room. It said although Katie's car, which Creswell had driven to meet the ambulance, was seized on the 3rd of August for forensic examination, only a search of that car was conducted. The search recovered 2 mobile phones, which were old devices attributed to Katie. Devices in the house were not seized nor considered, and no other action was taken to establish the existence and whereabouts of Katie's mobile phone.
The understanding that I had was that, now this has never been fully clarified because there's been about 5 versions. I was of the version that Creswell had claimed he tucked her phone into the blankets when she was being transferred into the ambulance. Now, anybody with a titter of wit would have been able to switch on to Katie's network and find that her phone was activated in Altnagelvin Hospital while she's unconscious. 2 weeks later, it's activated again. This is all in the early stages of a girl's death and funeral, and nobody is asking questions. Now, I was informed that her phone was missing and her laptop. So if I knew, the police knew. So again, I knew that within 3 days of Katie's death. And then I was able to cross-check that with it's actually a member of staff for an elected representative in the Derry area. And I asked him, can you find this out for me? They knew that. And that was still in the early stages, that there was no phone, there was no laptop. And, I really cannot understand how lax this was. And you said about the car, not only did they just do a cursory search of Katie's car, nobody inquired as to where she was the night before. She was over the border. She was over the border in his car. And the beating that she got, there must have been blood. But that car was taken from the house before Katie left the house the next morning. It was driven away by Rose. She took his car to work, not Katie's, in which she normally travelled every day.
Rose Montmorency.
Yeah.
Right.
Who shared the house with them. Now, there might be nothing in that. She simply picked up the first set of keys and ran. But let's also be honest. When Johnny's being interviewed, what does he say? Why did you take Katie's car and why did you go back to the house? Oh, well, I was meeting our friend. And then as they pushed him a bit further, I wasn't insured for Katie's car and I didn't want to get caught. True. Why did he drive his kids then to his mother's house in it that morning?
So you're talking about him being interviewed, and that, of course, isn't until his arrest in March 2021, which is 7 months later. And at that point, this police ombudsman statement says the location of the mobile phone, of Katie's mobile phone, was only discovered then following that interview, and the phone had been hidden in a field.
He made a comment that he had been upset and threw the phone away. That had to have happened very close to his arrest. He obviously had figured out police were becoming interested in him. He couldn't have missed it because, the people were being interviewed who were going to report straight back to him. And he is then, he starts to change things and the phone is removed. He knew that was the key evidence, but never let it be forgotten. He retained that phone somewhere for long enough and he opened it and it connected to the network on 2 occasions. While Katie was in hospital and a second time after 2 weeks. Whether it happened beyond that, we don't know. But it was that phone, and even before they got the phone, they were able to do GPS tracking to find out where they had been because they were able to establish which phone she had. And that was pretty much, I think, through other people's communications with her, which what girl that age has no phone?
Well, exactly. And also, but I mean, even had you believed which they did clearly for long enough, believe Johnny Creswell's scenario that Katie had taken her own life, like a girl that age, surely even investigating for the coroner, which would have had to have been done, they would need to have access to her phone to see was anything left on it. Was there messages? Was there notes or anything? Surely?
Well, that's what I thought, but that didn't fit in. There was just a very strong narrative of Katie being in a very dark place. That was the narrative that was fed. And it has to be said, it wasn't just Creswell who was pushing that. That was very firmly entrenched. And it's that people struggled with, not Katie. There were, you have Jill Robinson, another co-defendant, who's telling people, oh, Katie tried to kill herself once before. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. All bolstering the story. This is where the police really, it's the worst investigation I've ever encountered. It's not maybe on the same scale as the Colin Howell and Hazel Stewart, but there are echoes here where people aren't learning. You have to be inquisitive. It's your job. And that when the line came out about, oh, just because Johnny Creswell was a bad boy didn't make him a murderer, we needed evidence. Stop there a wee second. You needed suspicion. That's what a police officer needs, reasonable suspicion. And then you dig in and then you get your evidence if it's there. But there was no suspicion here. This was a cut and dried, poor girl, life was too much for her and she did this. My next question, if life was too much for her, what was that life? What was it that drove her to do that? Nobody asked those questions either.
I actually think there's shocking similarities to the Howell and Stewart case. I was reading recently back over it and some of the police ombudsman recommendations essentially after it. And one of the things that stood out was that officers did believe both of them, even though they had both been proven to have lied. So in the circumstances with Johnny Creswell, he mightn't have been a proven liar as such, but he was a proven convicted, pleaded guilty to a catalogue of horrific assaults on a woman previously. And as you say, the details of which included attempted strangulation. There was also, at that point, the ombudsman and of course, Howell and Stewart got away with this crime for more than 20 years. It was only when Howell, the dentist, came forward and his conscience got to him and he admitted it, that actually the double murder of their partners was uncovered. And they lived as free people, those two killers, for 20 years, which is chilling to think what Creswell could have done had he not been apprehended, facing charges, and indeed took his own life the first day of his trial. But yeah, the similarities are quite, there's very much, quite a lot of alignments. Let's look at this ombudsman statement as well, and the statement in it, and you can explain this to us as well. No inquiries were conducted to establish the circumstances of Katie's alleged fall from a horse. Now, obviously, the injuries on her body, which we now know were caused by the horrific beating she got from Creswell, that they were sort of written off as being she'd fallen from a horse. She always seemed to be falling from a horse, didn't she? Even though she was an extremely talented show jumper. But they made no inquiries in connection with that.
They made absolutely no inquiries. And the other aspect of that is, if there's been a horse fall or a trample, as it was alleged, that's an immediate check at hospital, because there can be a lot of internal damage caused, which does not show. And yes, anybody who rides a horse will tell you, you do fall, but not at the speed that Katie was falling. She seemed to be falling every too often. And we had this conversation the other day about stable owners. Would you be able to keep employing a jockey who falls so often? Because number one, they're damaging themselves too much. Number two, insurance costs are going to be driven up. And number three, really have to think about whether they're suitable for the job from a safety perspective alone. Just wanted to go back to one thing that you said there about Johnny may not have been a liar. He was a proven liar because in Abby Lyle's case, what did he say about her? She self-harms, she rolls about, she hits herself. You don't know what I've had to do to protect this girl. And I've poured my whole heart. And that is the same pleading desperation that we saw on the videos in court of, my wee sister-in-law, Katie, a great wee girl, the same platitudes, and it's all false.
Of course, you're correct. He did that during his questioning in relation to Abby Lyle, and then pleaded guilty, of course, ultimately to what he had done. Well, to some of what he'd done to her, because he actually that time got off the bigger charge, didn't he? Which would have landed him in jail for longer.
Yeah, they did. There was a deal struck that if he admitted the assaults, they would drop the kidnapping charge, and it remained on the court books. And ironically, the damage to her mobile phone.
Now, you've touched on this, but inquiries did not take place, the Ombudsman says, with Katie's family and friends to see if they'd any concerns and to gain a greater understanding of her life. There was no clear witness strategy recorded until January 2021, which is at which point they eventually do launch a murder inquiry. And that resulted in the missed opportunities to take account from potential witnesses. Now, that being that witnesses will, over the course of time, their memory won't be as fresh, but also they could have been more reluctant, after a period of time when Johnny Creswell has done what he's done, and he's lived it up after Katie dies. He goes back into show jumping. He's the man about town again, isn't he? Very, very quickly. And that sort of sense of, I find it in work within organised crime, when people get away with things, when they say they're going to get away with things and they do get away with it, it almost empowers them. It makes them more frightening to the ordinary people around them.
Very much. And if you think about Sarah, who we talked about before, he got away with Sarah as well. And he was, he absconds when they know the police are looking for him. And she made a very, very striking comment about how he stood in the stable yard laughing at what he had done to Abby. And this was to get her aware that he was a scary individual. So whenever he does expose himself to her, she's a lot braver than he took on. But he eventually runs and he's not caught. And if you've done that, if you've been welcomed back in and rewarded in your community, in the equestrian community, in the lifestyle, call it what you will, if you've been welcomed back and basically praised and sympathized that you had to go to jail over something as futile as what happened, which is the way it was portrayed, you are going to get very much. And I'm sure at some point he had said to Katie, who's going to believe you? I can just hear him saying that, who'll believe you? And over me, look at me, I'm untouchable. And you know something? He almost was.
Had those things not fallen into place and had the police not eventually realised there was something more to Katie's death than a suicide, he could be still out there doing that today, undoubtedly, and to God knows how many other women. Now, we're going to be careful about this, but the Ombudsman moves on to the ownership of the case, to the oversight and guidance, essentially to the control of it. And the Ombudsman says or finds that the police investigation, which straddled three separate departments, local policing team, criminal investigation department and major investigation team, until it was transferred to MIT, a major investigation team, in January 2021, was affected by insufficient oversight and guidance.
I don't accept that. They're a linked unit. And I have confirmation from the PSNI that the local neighbourhood team, again, we're talking about at the early stages of that week, when this information is coming in, I accept it's too sensitive a time, but they could have been working on it. So the local policing team are working on it. And they ask on the 10th, the Monday after Katie dies, they ask for detective input. It comes in the next day for Katie's postmortem and promptly leaves again that night. Katie had 1 day of detective input.
Detective input is from the major investigation team or the criminal investigation department?
They've equivocated on that,
Okay.
but they're all detectives, and I'm sure they've got phones. So I'm sure they could say, I'm not liking the look of this, or nah, I think we'll just leave it. Whatever it is, they're skilled investigators. And if it was out of their depth, refer up or refer on. I'm not accepting that that happened. I say a decision was made at the start and they had to stand by it because it was going to cause too much ruction down the line. I may be wrong, but until they give me evidence against that, because to me, you're all talking about the one police station, for dear sake. It's not like you're having to bring in a squad from South Africa to start dealing with it. It's all under one unit. And really, do these people not talk to each other?
And a decision like that you're talking about has to be made by somebody experienced and senior, surely, for it to hold sway the whole way along. The Ombudsman, and I'll quote here, says, ownership of the case was initially assigned to an inexperienced officer from a local policing team. Despite more experienced officers in local policing, CID and MIT being fully aware that the officer had neither the experience nor capacity to manage a case of this nature. When concerns were raised early in the investigation, particularly in respect of Jonathan Creswell's history of violent and controlling behaviour, it was the clear duty of those more experienced officers to ensure there was proper supervision, guidance and control.
Exactly, but that didn't happen. I really don't like the fact that the local policing team, they're coming down so hard on them. They did ask for help. They did raise concerns.
And was it to the local policing team that some staff members from the hospital sort of spoke and said they were a bit concerned?
I would assume that there was two-way contact. Now, after I phoned in, I was keeping in contact, and we all have our sources. I was keeping in contact with another source close to the situation who told me it was not looking good. Now, that's when I begin to think, well, at least they're talking to the hospital. At least somebody there's a flow back here. And I couldn't understand it. There was just no suspicion. Yet others far, far removed were very perturbed by what was going on. And as I said, if we could see it, not even close to Altnagelvin, if we could see it only by what we knew, why could the police when it was right under their noses? And another thing that did jump out at me, and when he's on body worn, immediately after he arrives at the hospital or at the side of the road, he gives 3 different versions within 45 minutes, roughly, of how he unclipped or how he got Katie down. Mm-hmm. Nobody said to him, well, which is it, Johnny? Did you loosen the rope? Did you take her weight and, or did you cut it? Or did you unclip her? Which is it? Because that had just happened. It would have been completely clear in his head. But you remember they always say about a liar needs a good memory. He didn't do terribly well there. And I picked up on that. Nobody tackled him. And he's at pains to point out, no, Katie has no mental health issues. No, the only thing, she works too hard. You're getting this pity, this adoration for her. He really thinks she's a great wee girl and a great writer. And we just love her in the house. Yeah, he did. But that mask of vulnerability while he's rocking backwards and forwards in the car and very emotional and wiping the sweat from his brow, it's a mask.
And I mean, what he does next is he returns to the house. He goes and has a cold shower and he gives his clothes to Hayley Robb and she goes and meets a friend, Jill Robinson. Both of those women were convicted in the courts in Derry in relation to their roles in this, and they washed the clothes. The Ombudsman says that CCTV footage which showed Creswell leaving and returning to Katie's address, which was always also his address, of course,
yep,
on the 3rd of August, that was within the time after he handed her over to the ambulance men on the road to the hospital. And a woman taking a bag from the house and putting it in a second car was not pursued as a line of inquiry. This was despite one of the first responding officers noting the delay between the ambulance leaving with Katie, at which point Creswell was told to follow, and his eventual arrival at the hospital in a different car accompanied by a woman.
That's right. And it's ironic because they speak to Haley. They take him out and put him in a separate car, and they have her on body worn. And as she's talking to the police, saying about, well, Katie was already away in the ambulance, and I did this and I did that, and only, 2 feet behind her is a bag of clothes, and we don't know what was on those clothes, and we'll never know. But they were enough that he wanted them out of the house. They were literally sitting behind her as the police spoke to her as she sat in the driver's seat of her car, captured on body-worn photograph. So that's how brazen that you can actually sit with that stuff. I mean, instead of dumping it somewhere and going back for it, which probably wasn't a good idea either, they rushed to the hospital. Jonathan's asked, well, why did you go back? Oh, I had to meet my friend. She didn't know how to get to our house. Nonsense. She'd been there many times, but no checking. And I actually thought the officer who was speaking to him in the car was suspicious. I might be wrong on that because I don't know any of the officers' names, but I got the impression by the questions he was asking, he was suspicious. But we'll never know that. And removing evidence, and then by the time all that is discovered, it's too late. It is too late. And the case, okay, they got Johnny charged with murder, but the case went as best it could, because let's not forget, there were other aspects to this, and the other women, they were charged with many other offences or were facing many other, and then it was whittled down to a smaller level. And it had to be, because the police had no investigation going. The minute that Katie's remains were returned to her family, that was it. There was no investigation, no suspicion, nothing. And even when it did get going, the fight to get that going was criminal. There's no doubt about it. And to get it going, it started in the January. Now, it did go once it reached that point. But retelling the story over and over again for the same people who had concerns has been brutal. And there came a point whenever anybody's speaking to police before the investigation, you were the worst in the world. Almost, how could you be doing this? Leave it alone. That man is in pieces.
Is that some sort of a groupthink that seeps in, and there's a tendency for that to happen within police forces?
I don't know. And I think that's probably the best way I can answer that is by saying I've never been in this position before. I've never been on both sides of the bridge where I'm covering a case in court or aware of a case in court, and on the inside of it trying to get something done. And that is something that I have really tried to reconcile with myself. What was I doing wrong that they weren't believing me? Or were they thinking I was trying to get a headline? Because I wasn't. If I wanted a headline, I could have got one long before this kicked off. My story was Katie. Somebody please look into this. She's 21 and she's lying in a grave. And nothing is being done about the man who, as I believed, put her there. He is running free. He is living his life. And you're quite right. We have screen grabs of the parties that Christmas, of him, out celebrating, and, everything just moved back on. And that, how often was he going to be rewarded for getting away with things and becoming more emboldened? Who was going to be next? Because there would have been another one.
And what gets me each time with this story is because of these failings, these failures, Jonathan Creswell sat in that hospital room and was there when Katie Simpson took her dying breath. She probably didn't have, the cognitive ability to know that, but we will never know whether she did or not. And he also stood and lowered her into her grave and behaved as a chief mourner at that funeral of that 21-year-old child that he had murdered and got away with. I think that is very hard to get past. The images of that do flash into my mind whenever I see pictures of Katie. I obviously didn't know her or anything. I'm coming at this because I'm a journalist, but, a girl her age smiling from those photographs, and you think of those last few hours of her life with that monster at her bedside.
It's sickening. It's I struggle with that, I'll be honest with you. It's the idea like he was almost there looming over her and absolutely making sure she opens one eye. I need to start making sure that she's got the story right. How horrible it's like being executed, where the executioner standing right beside you the whole time, the person who's going to remove your life. Even in those circumstances, you wouldn't be making eye contact with them. You would just be, it's just brutal. It shouldn't have happened. I don't know why the hospital allowed it, because as I understood it, there was supposed to be some level anyway of COVID restrictions at that time, but maybe it was just explained that, he cared so much about her. Did he? Hell, this is a man who cared about himself. He did not care about anybody that was not, that didn't, that's the narcissist minimum. It's just all about him. How is this going to affect me? How do I look here? There's nobody else featured. And then you say about the funeral, incredible. An Oscar-winning performance and lauded, pat on the back. Poor Johnny, you're going through this terrible, terrible time. And Johnny, you found her. And, at that point, of course, we're making waves. But as I keep saying, standing there, waiting for the blue lights to come, even subtly, didn't happen. And then knowing the grave, she's in her grave, and they start to cover it up. And then it's over. She's really gone. And this wasn't illness or, a typical accident. This is murder. Somebody put the child in her grave in the most horrendous circumstances, and they can stand over the grave looking pious and upset. I think he probably was totally relieved.
Probably.
That's the only way I can put it. He was in complete control. And he knew how, it's literally The Greatest Showman. He knew how to work the crowd. But the crowd loved him. And that fed him. And that ego, that narcissistic, which led him to put his hands, as is expected, to squeeze the life clean out of that girl. That takes some amount of anger and coldness. But even thinking of that, he's running about the hospital frantic, and he knows what he's done. Not only that, while he never actually comes clean on what he did there, he does admit he's beaten her. He does admit he's beaten her in the car, under the bridge. And he says, I gave her a hiding last night because of Shane. And what happens then? Nothing. The lies are perpetuated. He made the admission in the car. He became very emotional. I think there was a lot of angst that morning at the hospital, that Monday morning. And I think they probably were told, look, you can't come in. We need to work with her. So they got into, I think it was Haley's car. I'm not sure if it was Haley's or Jill's, but they drive to Craigavon Bridge in Derry. And there's Haley.
Rob.
Yeah, there's Jill Robinson, and there's his partner, Christina, and he breaks down completely. And I mean, I could understand the pressure at that point. He breaks down completely and says, you think I did this? And they're very quick to say, no, no, no. Jill in particular, absolutely not, Johnny. We don't believe that at all, Johnny. How could you think we'd believe that? And then he says about the beating. He's beaten her the night before, given her a hiding, as he put it. He then says he's going to cover up, or because he's worried that they'll look at him and blame him for what Katie did, still putting it on to Katie that she did it. He says that he is going to tell the staff that she came off the horse or was trampled, or words to that effect. So he makes it clear what happened there. I'm sure if any one of those three had been spoken to properly, they may have got some kind of a variance of what occurred there. And there's your suspicion. There's your key.
And maybe most significantly, Christina, his partner, it's her little sister, Katie, that's dying in the hospital.
It is. She was a child. You know, there's a young girl here. What on earth is going on? Somebody please speak for Katie. And I'm talking retrospectively. Somebody put aside everything else, but nobody did. I find that incredible. I can't actually find a reason for it, but I just find it stunning and sad that nobody could step back for 1 second and say, look, he said he beat her. I'm not saying, I mean, let's be honest. You wouldn't be able to say that's what killed her, because the hammering did not kill her. But why not just make that clear?
And in untangling this, you know, we know that he was abusing Katie from a young age, probably the age of 10. The judge in the case against Jill Robinson and Hayley Robin, Christina Simpson, wasn't part of that case.
No.
But the judge in that case recognised that there was coercive control within these relationships, which is something we're still starting to understand, and has become a criminal offence. And the judge did, while that, you know, wasn't part of the charges, he did recognise that that was likely part of the relationship that Creswell had with two of those women in that car.
Yes. There's coercive control was brought in. We can't quite figure out to what level. It was certainly pushed very hard by the defence for the three women. Rose de Montmorency, right? It was more a case of being absolutely just starstruck. I mean, she was the youngest of this group, and she seemed to be just starstruck.
And she was not having a sexual relationship with Creswell. She was simply starstruck by him. She was living with him since she was a young girl. She was living in that house with Katie, with Christina and with Johnny, and Christina and Johnny's two young children. She told police, certainly, that she was not in a sexual relationship with him, the only of the women that wasn't. Hayley Robb admitted that she had been in a relationship with him since about 2011, which was when he was released from jail, having served a very short sentence for the offences against Abigail Lyle. She was in the Olympics, actually, this year. And Jill Robinson had been in a relationship with him some years previous, while she was older than him. She said that he never beat her. He never was violent towards her, and she wasn't afraid of him. But certainly that wouldn't have been a regular relationship he'd have had with a woman.
Johnny seemed to have quite a number of women, and I don't know that he was particularly nice to any of them. But for some reason, they seemed to find him magnetic. Hayley would say herself that she tried several times to distance herself. She just couldn't do it. And there was a lot of this business of, and as I look at it in the broader scheme, a lot of them are probably a lot wiser now, but one man is able to either melt these women at the knees or make their day. And he just seemed to have an ability to pull, I really don't know what it is or was, but there's
Mesmerise?
something, I don't know.
Mm.
Um,
I mean,
I
Abigail
really don't
Lyle
know.
has since given some interviews and she has tried to explain it. And she said she doesn't really know what it was, but she just fell in love with him instantly. And
Mm.
she said that, obviously he was very violent towards her and everything, but it was when he was nice to her, she felt $1 million.
Well, isn't that what every domestic violence relationship is about?
Mm.
Because they're never going to do it again. It's never going to happen again. And then I love you so much that you drive me to this.
Mm.
Lots of this was going on. Now, I can have some understanding of one, a relationship with two people in it, Creswell and say Haley, for example. But this man is going around them all.
And they all
All
know
the
of one
women,
another as well.
they're all,
Yeah.
they're all quite aware, as is apparently said, they're all quite aware of his behaviour. They don't seem to object to it. I don't know if that's a throwback from the equestrian industry or not.
Mm.
All I can say is it was very prevalent here. He was very able to control. There's absolutely no doubt about it. There's one thing being able to control somebody's movements and stuff, but to control their mind is a very, very dangerous individual. And what for? King Johnny. He had to be the center of attention. He had to be the number one, the loudest, the funniest, and they're all there for him. We have images of them. I've talked about this before. We've images of him at, out on nights out, at dinners, say a table of 10, Johnny and 9 women. And this does not seem to cause any, what I have to say is one particular night I was at an event, and this is between Abby and Katie. I was at it by accident, and they all sat as good as gold round that table, while Johnny was very boisterous and loud and funny, and everybody coming over and slapping him on the back, and he was the man. And these women, and some very strikingly beautiful women, all sitting there perfectly coiffed, sitting good as gold. There was no loud behaviour. I don't even know if they got up to dance.
There was no drinking allowed.
No drinking was allowed. So there's control again. He was fanatical about, and he didn't like, there were certain clothes he didn't like them to wear. They didn't like them to have their hair short. He didn't, he'd the typical woman that Johnny always was attracted to had long dark hair. And that was always, and I think I've said before, if you look at photographs at the same age of Abby and Katie, the similarities are frightening. They
Haley
really
Robb
are.
too had long.
Haley had long dark hair. Yeah.
We should say maybe the reason we know about that conversation in the car under the bridge while Katie has just been brought to hospital is because Haley Robb did eventually, as the murder investigation got underway and as she was questioned, she did eventually work with the police.
She did. And I have to be fair, after what I witnessed, it was to her detriment. If anybody had, or if Haley had thought that she was doing the right thing, and she was, she just told them everything. And she ended up hit the hardest. The Rose and Jill really pretty much stayed quiet and stuck to their guns. Okay, they pleaded guilty. But they never really gave any huge insight into their real actions. But Haley tried so hard, and she got the most charges against her.
Yeah.
And she got the stiffest sentence of the three.
And I do say, from being in court that time, the scenario that was laid out by Rose was just bizarre. When she had seen Katie and the humour she was in that night and the cups of tea, it was just a bizarre scenario that it's hard to, now that we know what happened, and I suppose looking at the medical evidence and other evidence, it's It doesn't make any sense.
Well, there's another aspect there that I find quite, unusual. Katie and Rose shared a bedroom. Small house, so everybody's going to be doubled up somewhere. So they share a bedroom. But that night, Rose sleeps on the sofa. And she's still up when Johnny comes in the door with Katie, as we are told happened, because we'll never know. And he comes in, and Katie's battered and bruised. But Rose said, oh, no, she laughed. She said she'd fallen off a horse. Ha ha, rolled her eyes and went to bed. And then instead of going to her normal bedroom and up where Katie is, she goes to bed on the sofa. But Johnny, we now find out, well, he admitted it. He followed Katie to her bedroom where they had sex again, he says. And this is all normal. This is normal. And even if she had fallen and made the joke about falling, let's be honest, is she going to be ready for that kind of behaviour when she's trying to go to sleep to get up early for work the next day?
And remembering who else was in that house. Johnny's partner,
Correct.
Christina, her older sister, in a room. And the house, yes, it's like a postage stamp, certainly, the landing and the doors where they are. And his 2 young children.
2 little ones, yeah. Now, I would suspect they were sound asleep. I mean, this is now coming on 1 o'clock in the morning. But, I mean, this conduct went on with them in the house, with 2 other women in the house. And there's no concern.
And it's also, not fair to Katie's memory to suggest that she's willingly sleeping with Johnny Creswell. Because from what we know, from what our investigations have shown, she was abused by him, both sexually and physically, since she was a young child.
That was disclosed in court. And I don't think it was ever challenged. The first time they said on what evidence they had been able to find and look at various phone analysis and various things like this, they said it is believed that he had been controlling her from she was about 9 or 10. Now, I don't understand how anybody can go to a child, but that was Katie's life. There was grooming going on there. This was the way. That is not an affair. That is abuse.
Mm.
And it wouldn't matter one iota if she thought he was the greatest thing on the earth. While she was underage, it was abuse. And it seems to have become the accepted norm. But I cringed in court whenever I heard that constant referral back to this, what was it they call it, this illicit affair, or this something that was sort of going on in the background. Well, for a start, Johnny did nothing in the background. Johnny was overt. And I certainly wouldn't have wanted to be in a relationship with anybody who was as free with their favours as that. And I can't explain their rationale, but he didn't want to let any of them go. They all seemed to be his property. And I don't understand that. Maybe they couldn't break free. Maybe they didn't want to break free, but there was an obsession with Johnny. Johnny was not, he didn't want to let them go because he was losing control. But I really struggle that Johnny ever deeply cared about anyone except himself. I do not accept that he was all, I can't live without you. I don't accept it because the only thing he was afraid of losing was his power and his control. So I can't go down that line, not from what I've heard in court, not from what I've witnessed. This is a selfish, egotistical man who cannot be thwarted. Thwart him at your peril, as many women find out, obviously. But the number of people who have been very open about how they were conflicted in their feelings about him, they sort of, and you could almost sense it in Hayley. I didn't really want to be with him, but I couldn't stay away. That's really quite frightening.
It is, and it's important for us to understand what's going on there
Yeah.
psychologically. The police ombudsman has made some recommendations, but they are all around sort of, um, areas which are still open, I think, in investigation. So we won't continue. There are certain investigations still ongoing in this case, and we will come back to them. I think we'll finish by saying, Tanya, as always, if there's anybody out there who would like to speak to you or to me in relation to Johnny Creswell, anything they know whatsoever in regard to his activities over the years, where he was, anybody who came into contact with them, anybody who has any sort of an understanding about what it was that gave him that power and control over women, we are always open to getting a communication, to calling somebody back and to having a listen to what they have to say. But I think really, as regards this police ombudsman statement published on the 12th of November 2024, this is an opener, and we'd like to think that this is just the beginning of investigations that will go further into this failed and flawed investigation into Katie Simpson's death.
That's absolutely right. And if you can just maybe stress that anybody who contacts us, it's completely confidential. We're already working with a number of people. We've been able to find some evidence to put their way that has disproved certain issues in their cases. So it's confidential, and it'll always be confidential.
For sure. Tanya Fowles, as always, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.